The sun was just beginning to dip behind the low hills, casting long, stretching shadows across the dusty road that led into the small town. Clara's heart thumped like a drum in her chest, each beat echoing the fear she felt deep in her stomach. She had been told this day would come, that at 19 she would be married off to a man she had never met, a poor farmer from the next valley whose name she barely knew. The words of her parents had rung hollow in her ears, their insistence that this union would secure her family's survival feeling cold and transactional. And now, as she rode stiffly on the back of a creaking wagon, her hands clenched tightly around the reins, she couldn't help but feel as if she were a piece of property being paraded to an auction. The white gown she wore, stitched by her mother's trembling hands, was heavy and stiff. It had been pressed and powdered with the best care her family could muster, yet every fold of the fabric felt like a trap, a reminder of her innocence and her lack of choice. The dust from the road clung to her dress and boots, and she imagined the townsfolk staring at her, whispering as she passed. She tried to hold her chin high, but the lump in her throat refused to budge. As the wagon rattled over the uneven road, she could see the silhouette of the man she was to marry. Daniel, the poor farmer her family had chosen, waited at the edge of the town. He stood tall and solid, the kind of man whose strength came not from wealth or pride, but from years of hard labor in the fields. His shirt was simple, his trousers worn, and his boots bore the dried mud of the valley he had called home all his life. Yet in the way he stood, steady and calm, there was an unspoken authority that made Clara's heart quiver in confusion and curiosity. The villagers were already gathering, drawn by the spectacle, their eyes sharp and judgmental. Some whispered harshly, others muttered with curiosity, all making it clear that this union was entertainment for them rather than a life-altering event for Clara. Her stomach tightened as the carriage slowed, and she realized she had no escape. Every step she took toward Daniel felt like a step into a world she didn't understand. When she finally dismounted, Daniel stepped forward. He didn't extend his hand with arrogance or entitlement, as she had feared a man might. Instead, he moved slowly, deliberately, as if he were inviting her to make a choice, not as if he were claiming her by right. "Clara," he said, his voice deep yet gentle, cutting through the chatter and the wind. She nodded, barely trusting herself to breathe, and he offered his hand. It was warm and calloused, strong but not demanding, and she took it hesitantly. Her fingers brushed his, and a strange comfort stirred in her chest, a fleeting sense of safety she hadn't felt in years. Her family pressed close, murmuring formalities and instructions, but Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't push or hurry her along. He waited patiently, watching her with eyes that seemed to measure her not as a commodity, but as a human being, fragile and real. The preacher's words were a blur to her, the ceremonial phrases meaningless, yet the gravity of the moment pressed upon her. She had been traded, in essence, yet this man, this poor farmer, carried himself with a dignity that made the entire charade feel less cruel. When the ceremony concluded, the customary expectations followed. Clara's stomach knotted as she recalled the whispers among the older women, traditions of asserting a husband's claim on the bride, of taking what society said was his right. Her pulse quickened with fear. She had no experience, no idea how to navigate this. She looked at Daniel, expecting perhaps a domineering gesture, a claim of authority over her body and spirit. Instead, he did something she could not have anticipated. He stepped back, bowing his head slightly, and met her gaze with quiet respect. "You are my wife now," he said softly, "but tonight, you decide what comes next." His words were simple, yet they carried weight. Clara blinked, trying to understand. He wasn't demanding, wasn't pressing, wasn't attempting to control her in any way. He was offering her choice, respect, and the only thing she had yearned for her entire life, the freedom to decide her own path, even in a situation she hadn't chosen. Clara's mind raced. The townsfolk stared, some with shock, others with disbelief. A poor farmer, expected to assert dominance, had instead given her the reins of her own fate. She felt a strange mixture of relief and fear, her chest tight with emotions she couldn't name. She had been prepared for humiliation, for force, for a man to claim what he believed was his right, but here was a man who chose patience over entitlement, respect over tradition. Her family's eyes were sharp, some pleased, some confused by Daniel's behavior, yet he ignored them. His gaze remained fixed on her, steady, calm, and unwavering. Clara felt something stir in her heart, a cautious hope, a fragile spark that perhaps her life could hold more than duty and fear. She had been given a chance, however small, to be treated as a person, not an object. As the crowd dispersed, and the town returned to its quiet routine, Clara and Daniel were left alone. The sun dipped further below the horizon, casting the world in soft shades of orange and violet. Daniel gestured toward the modest cabin he had prepared for their first night together, not with grandeur, but with practicality. The structure was simple, a reflection of his life, yet it radiated a sense of security. Clara followed, her steps tentative but filled with curiosity. Each moment, each gesture from Daniel, reinforced the unexpected reality: he was not here to dominate, to take, or to demand obedience. He was here to share, to protect, to create a space where she could feel safe despite the circumstances of their union. When they reached the cabin, the first flicker of warmth from the fireplace caught her eye. Daniel stepped aside, allowing her to enter first, and she felt the cold of the world outside recede just slightly. The cabin smelled of smoke, wood, and earth, a grounding scent that spoke of life and labor. He gestured to a chair, then knelt to tend the fire, showing her how to handle the hearth safely. She watched, heart pounding, as he moved with quiet competence, every action imbued with care, not arrogance. Clara realized, with a mixture of shock and awe, that this man, this poor farmer, chosen by her family for reasons she could barely understand, was teaching her what it meant to be treated with dignity and patience. He was reshaping the night she had feared would be one of shame and coercion into something that could, maybe, become a beginning. And in that moment, as she sat by the warm fire and watched him work, a seed of trust took root within her, a small, fragile belief that perhaps, even in a marriage arranged by circumstance, she could find kindness, respect, and perhaps even a sense of belonging. The fear that had gripped her for months began to loosen its hold, replaced by a tentative hope, delicate and new, like the first light of dawn breaking over a long, dark night. By the time the candlelight flickered low and the stars began to pierce the night sky, Clara understood something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. This marriage, though forced by her family, was not the end of her world. For the first time, she felt the stirrings of safety, of respect, and the possibility that life, even arranged and uncertain, could hold something gentle and real. Daniel, the poor farmer who had shocked the town with his patience and respect, had given her more than shelter and protection. He had given her a choice, a voice, and, unknowingly, the first glimmer of hope that her heart might not be entirely lost to fear. And as she settled into the warmth of the cabin, she realized that this night, the night she had dreaded, was beginning to shape a new path for her life, one where kindness and patience might exist even in the harshest of circumstances. The cabin was quiet now, the only sounds coming from the gentle crackle of the fire and the occasional whistle of wind outside. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, her hands twisting the hem of her wedding dress, her mind swirling with a mixture of fear, uncertainty, and a strange, tentative hope. She had never shared a room with a man before, and the weight of her new reality pressed down on her like a heavy, invisible cloak. Her heart raced, not with desire, but with the unfamiliar sensations of trust and vulnerability, emotions she hadn't known she could feel so deeply. Daniel, the poor farmer she had been married to only hours ago, remained seated in a wooden chair near the doorway. His elbows rested on his knees, his hands loosely clasped together, and his gaze never wavered from her. There was no judgment in his eyes, no hunger or impatience, only a quiet, steady attentiveness that made her chest ache in relief. He wasn't here to take or demand, he was here to wait, to offer her the choice she had never been afforded in her life. I don't know what to do," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. She looked down at her hands, still twisting the fabric of her dress as if it could ground her in reality. I've never done any of this before." Daniel's lips curved into a small, reassuring smile. "You don't have to do anything tonight," he said softly. His voice was low and steady, like the calm before a storm, carrying with it a weight of sincerity that settled over her like a warm blanket. "I married you to be your husband, not to frighten you or take advantage of you. Whatever you're ready for, that's enough. Nothing more, nothing less." Her eyes filled with tears, partly from fear, partly from relief, partly from the strange, unaccustomed sense of being seen and heard. No one had ever spoken to her this way before. Her family had treated her as a commodity, something to be traded, manipulated, or controlled. Yet here was this man, humble and poor, offering her dignity, patience, and a choice. The very idea of it was almost overwhelming. Do you really mean that?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I do," he said firmly. "I mean it with every bit of me. You're safe here, Clara. You don't owe me anything. You never have to do something just because it's expected. He shifted slightly, leaning forward in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. I only ask that you trust me, and I'll do the rest. Her heart fluttered in a way it hadn't before. Trust. It was a strange, foreign concept, yet she felt it stirring in her chest, fragile but undeniable. Slowly, she rose from the bed and took a tentative step toward him, unsure if she was ready to cross the invisible line between fear and connection. Daniel remained still, not moving toward her, not reaching out, simply allowing her the space to decide. She stopped a few feet away, her hands still wringing the edge of her dress. I want to trust you, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I've never had anyone to trust before. Daniel's expression softened, and he finally rose from his chair, moving to kneel before her. His eyes met hers with a warmth and intensity that made her heart skip a beat. Then you will, he said simply. And I'll prove it to you, every day, for as long as I live. She felt the tears slip down her cheeks, hot and unbidden. He reached out a hand, not to push or pull, but to offer comfort. She took it hesitantly, feeling the strength and roughness of his palm against her soft skin. It was grounding, reassuring, a physical promise that she was no longer alone in the world. For hours, they talked. They spoke of small things first, the mundane details of farm life, the chores that needed doing, the weather and the land. But gradually, the conversation deepened. Clara shared stories of her childhood, the small joys and the hidden sorrows she had carried, and Daniel listened with unwavering attention. He didn't interrupt, didn't dismiss, and didn't offer hollow reassurances. He simply absorbed her words, giving her the rare gift of being truly heard. And slowly, as the night stretched on, Clara began to feel a strange sense of peace. The fear that had gripped her for weeks, the terror of being sold into a marriage with a stranger, began to ease. In its place grew a fragile bond, a sense of connection that neither she nor Daniel had expected so soon. She realized that his strength lay not in dominance or wealth, but in patience, kindness, and an unwavering respect for her humanity. At one point, she leaned slightly against him, her head resting tentatively on his shoulder. He stiffened for a moment, unsure if she was ready, but then relaxed, allowing her the closeness she sought. The firelight flickered across the walls, casting dancing shadows that made the cabin feel like a sanctuary separate from the harshness of the outside world. You didn't have to be like this, Clara murmured, her voice muffled against his shirt. No one has ever treated me with care. Always with expectation, always with rules. But you waited. Daniel's hand rested lightly on her back, steady and comforting. Because you're not property, he said softly. You're a person, and people deserve patience, respect, and kindness. Especially someone like you, who's never had a choice before. Clara felt a warmth bloom in her chest, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and a budding affection she didn't yet dare to name. She had come into this marriage expecting fear, shame, and obligation. Instead, she had found safety, respect, and a man who treated her with dignity and humanity. The contrast was almost overwhelming. The hours passed quietly. She tended the fire while he checked the cabin's doors and windows, ensuring they were secure against the night chill. They worked side by side, not as master and servant, not as stranger and bride, but as two people beginning to navigate the fragile beginnings of trust and companionship. As the night grew deeper, Clara finally allowed herself to lie down on the bed. Daniel sat beside her, his presence a constant reassurance, not pressing, not demanding, simply being there. She felt a sense of gratitude so profound it made her heart ache. Here was a man who had shocked her expectations, not through wealth, power, or force, but through patience, respect, and unwavering kindness. And in the quiet darkness, as the snow fell softly outside and the cabin glowed with the soft warmth of the fire, Clara realized something she hadn't dared to hope for. Perhaps this marriage, forced though it was, could become something real. Perhaps, with patience and care, she could find love and trust in a life she had once thought would only bring fear. Daniel's voice, low and calm, broke the silence. You're safe here, Clara. I'll make sure of it. Tonight, tomorrow, and every day after. And for the first time since she had been told she would be married off, Clara felt a spark of hope, fragile yet undeniable, that her future might not be dictated by fear, but by respect, choice, and the quiet, steady care of a man who had already begun to change her world. The night stretched on around them, full of promise, and in that small cabin, two lives began to intertwine in ways neither could have foreseen, bound not by expectation, but by patience, trust, and the slow, steady unfolding of human connection.